This way. All right, today we are going to now moving on, having looked at the policy, whatever it is, all sorts of things, what policy analysis is and so forth. Now, I mentioned earlier that when we talk about policy analysis, we're not talking about just policy analysis of the policy which is operational or existent, but we also look at the policy analysis for the policy that we intend or you intend to develop. So we are looking at two things. What we call the ex post ante and ex ante. This means the pre and post, right? I think that question by my answer. Pre and post tasks that individuals may take as part of their policy formulation processes. So let's just look at that and see what it is. We need to understand what policy formulation is, and it is going to help us. What is it? Policy formulation in general is just a process, right? It is a process of where you are or we are trying to develop an effective and acceptable course of action, right? For addressing an identified need that may require government intervention. That's what policy formulation is all about. So it is about how we develop very importantly to look at these two terms here, an effective and acceptable course of action. In other words, are you developing a policy which is going to be effective, or are you developing a policy which is going to be acceptable? Now, here, when we talk about a policy being acceptable or being effective, we're looking at the course of action that we want to address. If you want a policy on the girl child, for example, is it going to be accepted by the majority stakeholders, by people, by the girls themselves, and something like that? And two, is it going to be effective, right? Is it going to deliver the desired result that we intend to achieve by actually formulating or designing or developing that particular policy? So this is how you would look at policy formulation as a process. And also, what you must take note of is that a policy formulation will focus on two things: its effectiveness, that's one thing, and its acceptability. Of course, there will be a lot of other issues, issues of efficiency. How efficient is it going to be in terms of implementation of that particular policy? And when we look at issues of efficiency, then we can see how we proceed, because it may involve looking at the type of results that you get from your implementation and the costs involved in that. I think when we are looking at the policy and policy analysis previously, we looked at some stages that we follow, right? If you remember so much, I think we're also going to get them here. The SWOT analysis, the PESTEL analysis, the cost-benefit analysis, cost efficiency and cost effectiveness analysis, all these things come around as part of your policy formulation issues that you must follow. Now, here, when we talk about the effective policy formulation, we are looking at how we are able to be accurate enough on what we want to do and how we want to achieve that. And also secondly, whether what we are dealing with, the information that we are using for that formulation, for the policy formulation, actually can give us evidence. That's very, very important. You cannot, for example, a simple example is you cannot go out to develop a policy when only 2 girls have been married when they are young, right? That's a very, very small scale problem. But if that problem escalates and you have bigger numbers of girls getting married underage, then indeed that will be a serious problem requiring intervention, either by organizations or by government. And from there, that is where you have to look at what type of information do you have that can help you to actually formulate that particular policy, something like that. Yeah, so that is how you look at a policy as being effective. And here, when we're talking about an effective policy, we're also talking about how many stakeholders are engaged, how many people are involved, how much input do you get from people around you or from people in the community. So here, you'll be looking at the issues of evidence, which I think I've already mentioned here. So you'll be looking at what evidence is there to substantiate or to necessitate rather the need for that particular policy. 2, 3 people being very hungry, that's fine, right? You don't need a policy for 2, 3 people. Because if you analyze, you discover that they spend their time drinking without working, right? So do you need a policy for such people? No. So a problem, actually, in social work, a problem is a situation in which an individual is unable to function properly. That's how we look at a problem, right? And a problem becomes social in nature when that problem is affecting more than one individual. This is how we look at a problem. So even in policy formulation, we don't formulate a policy where it affects one single individual. We would rather formulate a policy that covers a broad range of people, and also that may have an implication on government activities on the protection of people's welfare. Now, secondly, an acceptable policy formulation is a situation where you must have an indication that the policy being formulated is likely to be accepted to go ahead for implementation. In other words, does the policy meet people's expectation, right? Let's assume we were to formulate a policy on same-sex marriages, for example, right? Would that be acceptable? Would it be effective? The first things first is it necessary? Is it necessary to have a policy in on same-sex marriages? Simple question. Is it? Why? Okay, so we have the cultural issues, society issues. How do society issues and cultural issues affect policy formulation, right? So here, if the culture says no, here we don't believe in same-sex marriages, whatever it means it is not a problem. So we don't need that policy and something like that. Now, if government goes behind people's beliefs to formulate and come up with that type of policy, it will not be accepted. It cannot be implemented. So policy formulation has to look at all these things and see whether it is necessary to come up with a policy where need arises. And also, let's proceed here. Now, here, policy formulation is a stage which is very, very critical in that it goes through stages, right? It goes through processes. And as I just mentioned earlier on, it requires very critical analysis of the situation on the ground. Sorry, some of these things, don't worry. Some things will be missing, but I think I'm not as bad at that. Yeah, so here you get that For you to go ahead to get a policy which is going to be effective, which is going to be acceptable, you must critically look at the situation on the ground to identify critical problems, right? That may necessitate the need for that particular policy. And also something that is going to address societal expectations. So here, this is how policies are supposed to be. And if you go back to when we were looking at policy analysis and the processes and procedures that we follow, we looked at an issue of needs assessment. Do you remember? Needs assessment helps you to come out with the views that people may actually have on the issues that you want to bring along. So issues of how do people feel? Do people think the situation government views as a problem, actually a problem on the ground, for example? No. Right? So how do you come with a policy on those things? I can give you a very simple example. You remember in a few, maybe 2-3 years ago, or 3-4 years ago, right? Government, particularly Ministry of Education, had a lot of problems with the school calendar, right? That's one issue which is premised on the policies. Now, the time that schools terms open and close and societal activities were crashing somewhere, if my memory serves me right. When schools were opening in July or whatever it is, something like that, or is it August, whatever it is, most younger children who are supposed to be in a school, to get into school, would probably, in some societies, in some communities, be in initiation ceremony or initiation camps, right? You remember that? So you had a lot of problems where all schools would open with no students in certain communities, in certain areas, because children are following normal society or cultural activities and the initiation ceremonies and something like that. So children are not there. So here it was a clear indication of government policy on education crashing, being in conflict with the actual operation of the policy on the ground. And I think there was quite a lot of issues going around, issues of awareness creation about how cultural ceremonies should not interfere with school programs, something like that. And how also chiefs should be able to manage their cultural issues in the context of creating an environment where children are not disturbed from their normal school calendar and so forth. Up until now, that policy, I think, is still just an oral type. I don't think I've seen anything written to that effect. Do we think that now, as we're talking now, schools have opened, right? This is the second week. Do you think all children have gone to school? Don't we have some who have maybe in initiation ceremonies or somewhere, something like that? It's possible, right? Yes. So you can see how a policy may not be accepted because of certain issues around, cultural issues, societal expectations, and things like that. And for that particular policy may not be effective. So this is how we look at the policies, and also when you're formulating policy, you must look at all those things. That's why there's a needs assessment. You have to do a critical analysis and also look at the situation as it obtains and see whether or not what you want to intend to do can actually be taken up by society. So, okay. So here, you find that your process of analysis will involve how you engage critical stakeholders. For example, an example of the education policy. Real critical stakeholders will be chiefs, right? Traditional leaders, religious leaders, the parents. These are critical stakeholders who would input into the policy that you want to develop in the context of education and education processes. So here, it is important that before you come up with a policy, one thing is you must identify, do you actually have stakeholders who, simple question, who's the stakeholder? The stakeholder is any individual or any organization or any association that has an interest in what you want to do. That's a stakeholder. Or that who supports what you do, or that who participates in what you do. So that's a stakeholder. So can be a stakeholder who has just an interest in what you do, right? Because he benefits from that one. or becomes a stakeholder because he can contribute to what you want to do, because he knows there will be something that is going to benefit from that. And also there will be a stakeholder who just want to participate as a beneficiary. So stakeholders is quite broad. This term stakeholder is very, very broad. So here, it is important that you engage your stakeholders so that you are able to understand their views and also how that can impact your policy formulation processes. And very interesting, you find that because of this type of approach, the process may not be technical. One of the biggest problems we have in Malawi with policies is that policies in Malawi are very, very technical, right? I mentioned last time, policies in Malawi are very technical because they're developed by technicians, and they're always developed in Capitol Hill for government policies, right? Yeah, where a villager in Misuku Hills or in Sanje or whatever it is not even involved. So policies are not supposed to be as technical as they should be. Yes, we need technical inputs, right? But we need that type of engagement where you get views from stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier, where they can tell you what can work, what cannot work, what can benefit them or what can affect them. And all these things are important in policy formulation so that you are able to move on to achieve your desired results. So, yes, and on the other, or the flip side of policy formulation, here I said policies are not only technical, right? But they're also very, very political, you remember, right? As they have to meet the politicians' aspirations, Yeah. So every policy which comes in, government in place, or government in control at that particular time, we look at it. Will this policy benefit us, right? Will this policy help us and our people? Will this policy give us support from the people? Let's assume somebody comes today and says, kwembelero mpaka kale kale ndachosa mtukula pakomo za veso za mtukula zata as a policy. What would happen? A lot of public outcry, right? Because of the people are benefiting from that. So policies are not only technical, but they also have a lot of political leanings because now they have to address and also meet the political ideologies and also the aspirations. Last time I gave you a question about politics and policies as being mutually reinforcing, or that the politics and the policies are bedfellows. So there will be a policy there, right? And that is where it becomes quite interesting. In public policies, why also I say policies and politics are bedfellows? This guy, I was here yesterday. I didn't use the board, but today they're still here. So this is a cleaner, right? I think it will be. So you have that. You have the politics. Naturally, let's say this is government, right? And from there, then you have the policies around, right? What are you trying to do? You want to see your face? You want to see your face here or something? Why? I've never checked. I don't know what it shows there. What does it show? Yeah, so why I say the policy and politics are the same things, let me tell you about the government. When we talk about government, right? Government will be the three arms of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Do I need Zolemba? Do you need them? Or can just be talking? So there will be the executive. Hey. Let me, can you check something somewhere? All right, check, they can help us with it. I just wanted to show you how, when we talk about policies and politics and also government, how these things actually become bedfellows. And maybe that will be able to explain exactly how you can understand what policies do and whatever. You're very quiet. How are you? You're still sick? But why are you too quiet like that? Okay. There are so many things that can make somebody be quiet. Hunger, anxiety, stress, right? Broken dream, all sorts of things. Or you got a bad message from somewhere on your phone, right? So let's just wait for this guy and see how can he. I just want to demonstrate how, when we talk about how we make policies and how those policies fit in, and how sometimes you find that the government and policies sometimes they're the same things around. Stand there. So as you are here, you observe those children, right? So these guys are ECD, this is how we deal with them. You see what is happening. You tell me what is happening. Enakwenda wili, enalia tatu kuja. That these are here, someone is just sitting around doing nothing here. Is he doing nothing there? You know, so this is how we check children. You can see at the corner, there's one who's doing his own things. That one in white. He's not even paying attention to what everybody's doing his own things. So when we look at what we call developmental milestones, this is how we look at this, right? This one boy running out of around, that one is, let's see. This is what we do. Okay. See, I've been getting these things every day, and they miss every day. All right. What I want to do here is to demonstrate to you why I've always said that policies and politics are bedfellows. In other words, for a policy to be effective and for a policy to be acceptable, there also must be that will from up above in government. Let's look at the issues of politics here. And when we talk about politics here, we are looking at the issues of government. Right? And when we talk about issues of government, we are looking at the three arms of government, which is one, the executive, which is the presidency. Right? And two of the legislature, right? Which is the parliament. And you have the judiciary. That's why we have all this, whatever it is and something like that, right? We talked about executive orders, right? Remember? We talked about the parliament making the laws and the whatever it is and something like that, right? The judiciary interpreting. These make government, right? Now, if you look at the structure of government, on a technical side, which is the executive here, there will be what we call the office of the president, because that is where the executive is, right? Now, the presidency here is under government and is operated through the political side of it, right? Where you have the ideologies of that government, whatever it is, and so forth. Now, under government here, then you have the ministers, right? Ministers are answerable direct to the executive, right? And under the ministers here, you will have the technicians, right? The principal secretaries, these are technical administrators here. Then you get the actual guys now, the directors. These are the actual technicians here. These are the actual technicians. Now, when policy is being formulated, and when there's an idea to start coming up with a policy, There are so many ways through which a policy can come into being from here. One of the areas is from here. The directors down here are the technical heads in their sector, countrywide, Sanje to Chitipa. So if it is education here, the director in education is the king boss, the king technical officer for education matters from Sanje to Chitipa, right? The director in social work here and community development, whatever it is, these are the chief, the kings of all sorts of things around. Now, policies will be developed based on what these people see on the ground. What is happening on the ground in education? Is there any demand? Is there a problem? Whatever it is, then they originate or initiate the process of coming up with a policy on educational issues, and so forth for all these sectors down here. Now, down here, there's the public now, the people. So you have the public around here. Within the public, you can also have the NGOs and the churches and all sorts of things around. These guys are the ones who can tell these guys that we have a problem in this area. Now, out of this, when the policy has been formulated, that's what we are going to go through here. The agenda and the processes to formulate will naturally be here at the director level. That's why you see a problem and you want to have the policy done. And once you do it, then it goes through processes where it must come back to your minister, PS to your minister. You are satisfied that you need a policy because there's a problem. And there are two things now that you have to look at. I've talked about acceptability and effectiveness, right? Now, when you are proposing to formulate a policy at this step, at this level here, you must be mindful on one thing. One, if I do this, will this policy be accepted by the public, right? Because the policy is going to be accepted by the public. Secondly, is it going to be effective? Is it going to give us our desired results? Is it going to address what is on the ground? That's one thing. So, before you push it up, you must be satisfied. This is where you deal with issues of identification of stakeholders. This is where you deal with issues of critical analysis to get the evidence, to prove that you need a policy, to prove that there's a problem that the public would require to have addressed. Now, when it moves up to somewhere here, right, that policy will always go to the executive and it will be the cabinet. So once you have your draft, you have decided, you have drafted it, and at stakeholder analysis, whatever it is, you include relevant people that can give you input rather into your policy and also maybe help you to analyze its effectiveness, acceptability. In other words, at this stage, you are also in touch with people in the judiciary, right? The lawyers. If this policy goes out here, what are the implications? If somebody does something contrary to this, can somebody sue us, for example, right? All sorts of things. So all these things, you put them down and so forth. When it comes back from cabinet and they say, yes, I think it is good, it can go on. That is when we take that policy to the legislature now, to parliament, right? For approval. Once it is approved, it means it's acceptable at all levels and everybody thinks it's going to be effective. Now, at cabinet level here, your policy will be scrutinized based on all other sectors. Statement number one I made when I started looking at policy analysis was that all policies, ni mitengo ya kachere. That's what I said. Sio nje? Ama ima ya kurana pass. Oh, but mitengo ya kachere matianchi chewa. What do you say? I know you are not chewa. Chingono, what do you say? And I don't even know. Misisi ya kachere makumana. Something like that. Mizu. Misisi or mizu? Which is what? Mizu ya kachere makumana pass. Policies is like mizu ya kachere. At cabinet level, when they're scrutinizing it, each sector will be saying, if you say girls should not be married at age 18, somebody say, what is going to happen? Right? Something like that. No? Somebody say, but if this is, so here, that's why they scrutinize. What effect will it have on agriculture, for example, on fisheries, for example, on women empowerment, on economic development. So they say, no, I think we are satisfied. That one should go. Something like that, you know. And then when they say yes, it comes back to you, is when you take it to Parliament for final approval. If the Parliament does not approve, it comes back to you as a technician to start working on it. They'll give you reasons why, right? Start looking at it. Maybe your analysis was not very good. Maybe your stakeholders not give you appropriate information about that. And maybe at cabinet level, there's a political ideology which they fear. If they say this policy should go, it will affect their politics, right? Okay, no, this policy, let's just stop. No, mtukula pakoma. Politicians will say, my elections are kubwera. Mfuna atakalipira. No. See and kai, it's just here sometime, right? That's how the political ideologies now. The fear of the politics, the elections and other things. So you see that this is how you find that policies do. And now, when the policy has been approved and you are implementing it here, right? The minister becomes the sole policy holder, right? Now, a minister is a politician, right? The implementer is a technician. And as a technician, you are under the minister. What the minister says, you do. That is where policy and politics become bedfellows. What your minister says, you are going to do it. If you say no, they'll transfer you to another place. Politics is now hitting you. That's what happens, right? Just not conflict. What the minister thinks in terms of politics and her position or his position, and what you're saying as a technician, you have that conflict and you move out, right? What the president thinks and what you think as a technician, you have no power as a technician. The executive has all the power, right? So I can say, no, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. We're going to do this and something like that. I had a shock of my life with Bingu. The small policy which he wanted to implement, where he wanted to build a center for old people, 65 years old, in the bush in Neno. Big center. Get all old people from Sanje to Chitipa, put them in Neno. Right? I found this. I was not part of the formulation. I would have said, no, don't do this. Because we won't cause a lot of trouble. You can't put people from Chitipa and people from Sanje and people from Chisi and the door together. Then in there exists Urukawaji. Right? So I didn't. But I just found it in process. And when we pushed it back, it went up to Bingu. Bingu became very angry because the minister they said, no, we're going to get a lot of money from donors. Chipita said that. But the minister says, not possible. Says, no, I'm telling you, we must do it. Right? But I was served by Bingu. You know? He came back and says, no. The technician is right. You cannot do that, Mr. Minister. So minister became angry and became very happy. So, and he turned his things around. So, now, Mr. Kim, what do we do? Let's start building houses for older people in the areas. I said, yeah, that's better. So there always must be some compromise when you have situations like this. All right, so this is how the policies, and as you develop these policies, you always must have that idea of how politics is going to affect your policy and also how you need to deal with the situation as it obtains. All right. Yeah. Well, not political policy. Yeah. So you find that policy formulation becomes highly dependent on the combination of both your technical knowledge, as I explained there, and also will be based on the consideration and the political power. So the battle of political power, how you deal with your policy formulation. And also, you find that the policies will always align themselves with the government in control. The policies we had during Munuzi are not the policies that we have now. Those that we had with Anna Haddad are not the policies that we have now. Those that we have now with our current president may be whatever it is. And this is where, when talk about why are we not developing, right? That's where this trouble is. Anybody coming in control of government, changes these policies, right? So instead of completing a cycle of activity implementation, we are not able to do that. As a result, we just become poor, 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 poor. We go. A simple example: we have all this whole long has been dug up with roads around. See your church. Let's assume somebody takes takes over government as a controller next year and decide to say no more Missionary Rongwe. It means we have dust all over the. I don't know what will happen. God forbid. So this is what it is. So the process will enable you to do the critical analysis of implications in terms of costs and also the implications in terms of the political views about what you want to do. And also, you will discover that the policy that we come up with, if you are a technician, ends up being what we call government programs, for example, right? So it is always a policy will end up into a program or into a series of activities that try to meet the needs of the people that you identified during your initial assessment of the situation on the ground. So a simple example like policies on ECD, then you have everything going on ECD, early child development, this and that, because there was a need and the community accepted it and it is effective, then we have it down. Obviously, social protection, safety nets, all these things are programs now, but generated by the policies. So what actually it means that indeed, policy formulation, once accepted and decided that it's going to be effective, it can lead into having a program for government. And also, when you look at the policy, the other issue is that it helps government to spread or distribute their power across sectors. That's what it means. In other words, as I did with my demonstration there, you find that if I say policies talk to each other, it means the power of control by government also cuts across all the sectors, just from that type of arrangement that we have down here. Well, thanks very much. I think this is how we should understand. Now, we're talking about policy formulation. Policy formulation is a process. Right? Policy formulation is a process. What do we mean by saying that policy formulation is a process? Now, when we talk about a process, anyway, what comes to our mind quickly is the sequences and the processes, the sequences and the stages through which a particular undertaking takes or goes through. So, policy formulation is a process because it goes through sequences and stages that you must go through in order to come up with that particular policy. And some of these sequences and stages are problem identification, or how you identify the problem that requires intervention. Right? Now here, the issue would be, if it is a problem identification, who identifies the problem? Right? Probably that would be the issue. Who identifies the problem? So who identifies the problem? Right. So this one really is just who identifies? Is it stakeholders? Is it people? Is it government? Right. This is quite it is either way. Government may see a need for a policy because it has seen or realized that there is a problem. The problem will be systemic. It will be generated by maybe social economic issues. It will be environmental in nature and things like that. Right? On the other hand, the public may come up with an idea to inform government about the problem in the area that they require government intervention. And sometimes it is through advocacy by NGOs can do that. We are all seeing how human rights organizations can push for policy change, right? Yeah, so there are so many ways through which the problem can be identified. From the example that I gave you down there, where you have the government entities, now the issue of identifying the problem, particularly in the government setup, where I mentioned about the issues of you have the minister who is actually the representative of the president in that sector, right? Then you go down to the technicians. Now, technicians usually have their own staff spread across the country. And from time to time, those people spread across the country will be giving feedback to their boss, who is the technical guy up there, the director, whatever it is, and so forth, up there. Now, it's up to the director sometimes to look at the information which is generated on the ground from the public to come up with an issue where he may identify a problem. It's very easy. If he is good enough, it's very, very easy to identify an issue based on the reports that you are getting from the ground, your ground staff on the ground. This is how you can identify a problem. Simple example I gave you last time, right? Was okay. If I am the director in social welfare at some point, right? And I am up there, and I go through the reports every month from my officers across the country. I discover that in research, so many students cannot go to school because there are no school fees, right? So many cannot go to school because there are no school fees. So many can go to school in Gigi, there are no school fees. In Suku, there are no school fees. If I'm good at my work, I should like to find out why should everybody not be in school because of school fees, right? Now, in your analysis, you discover that the reasons for why these pupils or students are not in the school is because they have nobody to support them with the school fees, right? And if you do further analysis, you discover that okay, these people have no parents. They are all the rest of the world who both parents. So in other they're orphans, right? So to you, if you are technically good, that becomes a problem. Now, if it is a problem at this level, what do you do? You say, "Gentlemen, come here. Everybody's not going to school, everybody's an orphan, so let's go and have a policy." You cannot do that. In a policy formulation, we depend on evidence, right? And the biggest and quickest thing you do here is to carry out a situational analysis. Right? The situational analysis or the actual needs assessment. But the situational analysis, in the situational analysis, we are trying to understand the situation on the ground as it obtains. What is the matter for the situation to be the way it is? What is the matter for the situation to present the way it is? That situational analysis will tell you. Right? Before you get your own judgment about, I think, because everybody is not in school, maybe this and that. No, that would be too unscientific. But as a technical guy, you need to have scientific, you need to have evidence and facts, and those things can only be available if you carry out what we call situation analysis. Now, the situation analysis now will give you an idea of what is happening on the ground. Why every child is not going to school, because of school fees everywhere. And now you can justify why you need the policy to address that. This is how what we call the OVC policy, ECD policies, whatever it is, came about because of the problems that we are having. Right? As for ECD policies, it was just an issue of malnutrition, stunting, this and that. Why? Because those social analysis discover that children have very little care provided to them at that young age. All these things, once you have your special analysis nicely designed and done to give you or rather to generate evidence for you to justify why you need to formulate the policy. This is how it is. Now, once you have reached that level, then you need to look at we analyze your problem, we look at your stakeholder analysis. Who do you think can play a part or some role in supporting your initiatives, of your policy, and also supporting your initiatives in formulating that particular policy? So you do stakeholder analysis, problem analysis, throughput analysis. What did I say about throughput analysis? Remember, I forgot. Get to one of these ways. Yeah, so usually in your throughput analysis, you also look at issues of alternatives. In case this fails this way, what can I do? Right? You must have got a fallback mechanism. If what I want to do fails, what can I do? Right? Simple question. Let's assume let's assume Mapikira Magis. You are seeing my Israeli Wakatila, you read somebody, I need to start cooking. Magis Azim. What else? Do you ever have an alternative in case? What do you do? In Niagara, you do the Magis Azim. What can you do?
If there is fire, you will go to
Huh?
if there is fire,
Okay, now, by the time you start kindling your fire, the fire gets on and takes you back there, that's going to be very far. See, don't ukayase makala, sima inani makala kuja, ukayase makala ukaiki kwa ya domika. See, don't so, what alternative do you have? For those people who use biogas alternatives, what do you have? So you have to have a gas cylinder, always, on standby. That will be an alternative. So even if the policy is true, you look at your, what I said, I like to call it throughput analysis, where you look at in case something happens, what can I do? Right? I'll give you an example last time where you have you got a project where you want to save jobs from early managers, open a school for everybody, right? But they're working every day to that school. But out of the 300 you wanted to go through education program, 70 get pregnant. Now, it means your planning was bad. They're walking 10 miles to school every day. Just as well living men, whatever it is, very high. So, it means you do not have your throughput analysis nicely done. What would be the alternative? This policy would be bad. Forget about it, just redesign it. Open a school with boarding facilities. so nobody moves around. See, this is how we look at this thing. So if the policies do, this is what we do. Now, once you have this done, you have to set your agenda. What is the agenda that I'm going to follow? What is it that I am going to do for me to come up with a policy? And next stage will be the actual policy formulation, which I did demonstrate. And from policy formulation, to get the legitimized by the legislature, by the cabinet, and all sorts of things. Then we move down to the implementation and down to your evaluation, which I think we did look at last time. Now, I think we have debated good background to how you can start thinking about getting a policy done, and also the issues that you need to consider really seriously. If your policy is going to be effective, and if that policy is going to be accepted by stakeholders, as I mentioned earlier, where stakeholders are those who benefit, those who input, those who participate, and also those who benefit by accident. They're still stakeholders, right? If you open a school somewhere, right, and because there are people around there, your stakeholder too will be that woman who said, and that's the stakeholder, because it's benefiting from that. Seriously? So stakeholder analysis becomes very, very broad to take into consideration everybody who fits into that policy or who eats from that policy. And that's it. Right. Let's go to our second part of this policy formulation. I'll start slowly by looking at reminding ourselves that when we talk about a policy, we're talking about a set of laws and regulations, or the directives. We're talking about issues that have to do with budget, and there are also issues of how we can achieve our set goal. So a policy is basically that. Do we have rules and regulations? What are the set laws that are going to be there? Issues of budgets and all sorts of logistics that may be required to fulfill that. Now, here, as I mentioned earlier, it's an interactive process where it involves several players and also the government and government organizations, stakeholders, and several others. Could be donors. Donors too become stakeholders because for them to fund the process of policy formulation, it means there's something that they intend to achieve by having that policy formulated and also that policy implemented. Now, given that type of understanding, when we talk about the diversity of stakeholders and the expanse of people who participate in policy formulation, you discover that it means that policies are determined by very diverse interests, right? You have the political interests, you have the economic interests, the social interests, all sorts of interests get into that particular policy. And sometimes, unfortunately, the beneficiary may not have their interests met sometimes. They may be usurped or taken over by the political interests or something like that. I can give you a very simple example. We had what we call the Tukwapa, right? Which was addressing the interests of the beneficiaries to address issues of poverty at the household and family level, even at the individual level. But somehow, along the way, politicians rejected. But the Tukwapa we had previously was not the Tukwapa we had in the previous one. It's changed to include the houses for other people and one cow, one goat, one cow, one family, or something like that, which was not included in the original design of the policy. Right? But those are the things we say politics can influence the policy implementation. Right? So it's changed from its original track into a track that has to meet the political aspirations, right? The political ideologies, as I mentioned earlier. So you can see how these things are going to play into the whole process of policy formulation and also the process of policy implementation. And why we have need for policy changes and also policy analysis is because of this interference, because of this diverse interest into the policy. Or we do analyze the policy sometimes to try to bring in or address such diverse interests. That's it. So policy analysis is we do it to address some diverse interests so that it is justifiable, it's acceptable, and also it may be seen to be effective. You know, when I was doing my training in America, our professors always told us once, 2 hours is zero time, right? Yes. Take 3 minutes to stand up, walk from here to the back of the institution. Let's try that. Let's try it. Stand up a bit. Stretch yourself, stretch yourself. Oh, you are dozing, you are dozing. Yes. Stand up. Really teaching technique. Yeah. Something like that. Good. Yes. You are dozing, you are dozing. Yeah. I just want to ask you, why? Maybe you had a very heavy potato for breakfast. It's going to be very interesting. Well, let's now sit down again and so what I'm saying is that policy formulation also must consider the diverse interests of stakeholders. Because in the end, or final analysis, it has an implication on policy implementation. They change the course that it was designed to take to address those diverse interests, particularly political interests, and sometimes even public interests. Right? We have seen programs or projects which sometimes change their course because the public doesn't want them to be taken away. We have seen those things. So this is how we will look at that. And also, I mentioned about why there is this issue of analysis. Sometimes it's also to try to address those diverse. Because of the
Saini. Bagus. Harus Saini. Itu namanya.
Itu saya
And also, personal analysis by implication becomes necessary in that context because it ensures that governments or an organization ensure that the benefits for which the policy was developed for are met. That's very important. So we analyze, we was going to see if we wanted organs to be in school, are they in school? If they're not in school, what is it? That's how we do the analysis. And also to check whether some people are being affected by the policies. possible. When you have a policy in place and when you have that policy being implemented, it's not a guarantee that everybody's going to benefit. Along the way, there will be people who will be affected, there will be people who will be victimized sometimes, right? By that particular policy. Let's assume that we say, okay, we want to do rural whatever it is, any project, right? There are people who benefit and people who suffer. They are doing a road, that's very good. There are people who suffer when their houses are demolished and they can't be compensated because they are caught in the wrong side